So, fashion and clothing possess and communicate meaning. However, a fashion item doesn't necessarily possess an essential universal meaning that's then transmitted to any individual who perceives it. It's not like the reflective model, like we discussed in the week on semiotics. It's not like a fashion item has a meaning that pre-exists the cultural context it finds itself in. Fashion items are much like the stone that we mentioned in the week on semiotics, how that can possess a variety of different meanings and usages depending on the context in which it is received and used. So that pieces of fashion do communicate meaning, but that communication is an active negotiation of meaning between the fashion item, which is the sender that's transmitting something, and the person perceiving it, the receiver of that communication. Could either be the person wearing it or the person seeing someone else wear it, or just seeing it in a closet or at a store or on the ground or in a museum or anywhere. So it's the person perceiving it, the receiver of that communication, who really gives it meaning. And that meaning is largely determined by that person's pre-existing ideas and values and beliefs that they hold as a member of a certain culture. So like we said with the stone, if you're from a culture that usually uses stones as weapons, then you're going to perceive that stone as a weapon, even though that stone isn't naturally, that stone just on the ground isn't inherently transmitting a meaning to you, saying, I am a weapon, use me as a weapon. It's how you as a receiver interpret it that gives it meaning. So a piece of fashion or clothing is not meaningful in itself. And a piece of fashion or clothing is not meaningful because of any individual intention. So someone could intend to transmit a certain meaning when they're producing that fashion item, when they're wearing that fashion item, but there's no guarantee that it'll be received and interpreted in that exact intended way. So that's what we mean by saying it's a constant ongoing negotiation between the sender and the receiver. A person buys and wears or makes a certain piece of clothing according to the meaning that they believe that item to have, or the messages that they believe that item sends. And oftentimes, as long as you're within that culture and other members of the culture roughly share the same systems of meaning making as you do, as we discussed in the weekend semiotics, then there's some assurance that you'll be sending roughly the message that you're intending to send. So if you're preparing for a job interview, you know not to wear one of those rainbow colored spinning bow ties, because that'll send the wrong messages, so to speak, unless you're applying for a job to be like a birthday party clown. So yeah, it's about taking the context into consideration. Job interview, no. Clown interview, yes. Or if you're showing up to a first date, you probably don't want to show up in a wedding dress because that'll send the wrong messages. Because in a culture, a wedding dress signifies certain meanings, certain shared implicit meanings shared by members of a culture. So that our shared implicit understanding of cultural values and meanings and representation play an integral role in the communication of fashion. So in fashion's communicative function, in its sender-receiver model, the culture surrounding the sender and receiver are paramount to consider, so that the same fashion item can communicate different meanings to different people at different places and times. So if you were born and raised in a very warm climate and thus positioned in a cultural context that values light clothing and like breezy and not too much layers, then you may see a Canada Goose jacket as being unnecessary. And not only that, but just the discourse shapes your taste to some degree. So you may see it as not very fashionable, like this big red poofy jacket. You're receiving that based on your lived experiences and your inculcated values and beliefs of what you want in a jacket, what you need in a jacket, probably a very light jacket if you're from a very warm climate, and the value of such a puffy winter jacket that doesn't quite fit into the context that you're used to. But then if you're born and raised in a very cold climate, if you were born and raised in Antarctica, then you would not only see that as highly practical, highly desirable, but it might strike your tastes in a more appealing way because its underlying functionality of keeping you warm aligns with your values and tastes growing up. in that cold climate. So the fashion statements of the clothes we wear aren't as simple or straightforward as this cartoon makes it out to be. Fashion statements aren't like spoken statements. They're not quite as overtly articulated as just merely saying what's on your mind, or like the speech bubbles in a cartoon. Like this cartoon makes it seem like each piece of clothing is literally a speech bubble where the purse is expressing Rhonda's idea that someday I'd like to see a UFO. Like I can't receive that by just looking at that purse. It might be going in her mind, but in this case, fashion is not adequate furniture of the mind made visible. Or her hat says, my favorite food is tuna, and I would eat it 5 times a day. That's good to know, but I couldn't glean that from her hat. So fashion statements and the meanings imbued and interpreted from items of fashion aren't simple messages in that sense. It's not merely this thing that's bundled up by the sender and then thrown and transmitted at the receiver. In this case, Rhonda would have to make her intentions a bit more explicit. Maybe have a UFO themed bag or a tuna themed hat. And then we can start to find some middle ground as the impartial spectator, as the receiver. And then we'd also have to do some interpretive work ourselves. We might already have to know Rhonda and her likings for tuna and UFOs to try to reach some common meaning in that negotiation between her and her fashion items as the sender, and then us as the receiver of said meanings. So clothes do fulfill the simple physical function of covering the body. That's kind of their denotative meaning that they're sending, that if I weren't wearing this, I'd be naked. That's kind of the denotative, the surface level, the obvious meaning there. But beyond simple covering our bodies and keeping us warm, clothes also function as signifiers in the production and exchange of meaning. Clothes construct a meaning and carry a message. You're literally carrying messages with you as you walk around in your clothing. And again, the meaning of that message depends on how they're received. So an evening dress may signify the concept of elegance. In that case, elegance is the signified meaning, and the dress is the signifier of that meaning. Or a tuxedo and bow tie could be signifiers of the concept of formality, or jeans and sneakers could signify casual dress, or maybe a certain kind of cozy wool sweater in just the right setting signifies a long nostalgic autumn walk. That could be a bit of a stretch, but depending on your own context, your own experiences with that fashion item, it could evoke very complex meanings and very specific niche meanings. And again, the role of the receiver is paramount. Maybe you personally had a bad experience with a wool sweater. Maybe as you were getting attacked by an owl as a kid, you were also trying to put a sweater, a turtleneck over your head, and it got caught around your neck because it was too tight, and the owl was pecking at you, and you're just struggling, and that wool sweater does not evoke positive or nostalgic feelings or romantic feelings. So the meaning of a fashion item accrues and builds up over time and accumulates from the shared cultural ideas and values and beliefs of the people surrounding that item and giving meaning to it. And in this way, clothes convey meaning much the same way letters in the alphabet convey meaning in the language, in our spoken and written language. So fashion is its own veritable language, and clothes are just part of its systems of symbols. And just like letters can be combined to form different words and convey different meanings, clothing items can be combined to connote some deeper underlying meaning. So like I said, that evening dress may get you close to conveying the meaning of elegance, but then you add a nice purse, like a shoulder strap purse and some heels and some earrings and styling your hair, and then that just builds up to define the meaning even further and make it even harder to misinterpret the message you're trying to send, the statement you're trying to make. Or you could have conflicting meanings, like tuxedo top and bow tie, but then wear jeans on the bottom, or one of those t-shirts that have a tuxedo on the front. Like the whole humor comes in the incongruity between the formality of a tuxedo and the casualness of a t-shirt.